Hello, hello, and hello. Welcome to the Power Hour with Dare to Scale from our desk to yours. You have joined the co-creators of Dare to Scale. That is me, Varsha. And
hi, and me, Evan.
Hello. So what are we talking about today? When we put out the post, we put out a call to request for some topic suggestions, and communication was one of the most recommended topic that we talk about. So we thought, yeah, okay, let's talk about communication. And when we put out the post about a week ago, the announcement for the Power Hour, we got quite a few emails to ask, so what are you going to talk about in the communication? Are you going to talk about communication in the workspace, or are you going to talk about communication outside the workspace? What is it? What is the point of this discussion? Or rather, what is the niche topic of this discussion? And Evan and I were talking about this, and we said, well, does communication from the workspace flow into the personal space? Or does the communication from the personal space flow into the workspace? Or is communication really borderless? When is the first time that we communicate externally? The minute we are born. We are taken away from that comfort zone and we come kicking and screaming into the world to say, I need help. Somebody help me. Somebody make this world a little bit more comfortable for us. Anyway, Dare to Scale being the space for founders, for entrepreneurs, for you, the listener. By the way, thank you for joining in. Let's talk about communication and some of the aspects that are important in communication that we normally look at, because what is the first we're sort of programmed or trained to think as communication only in the workspace. So let's address that, and you will see how this flows into all areas of life. Now, before we go into that, Evan, you were talking about something very important, which is we're not going into the models of communication.
Oh, totally not. No. I mean, we could be here until the middle of next week if we were to do that.
That's true.
And the fact of the matter is this. Look, it's not an academic discussion or anything like that. It's just really you have two people who are talking, and the context there is easiest to have it in the workspace. Because we have our sort of game face on and the communication that happens in the workspace itself. And of course, remembering that the person talking is often viewed as the communicator, and the person receiving the message is obviously the receiver. But it's interesting to remember that both people are in fact communicating. And mostly we're going to be talking about the verbal piece. But if you do any research on how people communicate, only about 7% of the words. There's a lot in the physiology. There's a lot in the tonality that is actually being communicated at the same time. So as receiver, you might be hearing something you don't agree with, and you might frown. So you're actually communicating in a non-verbal way. But so the point here is both people are communicators, and we're just talking about two people talking. No models, just two people talking.
Just two people talking, and two people saying something, maybe not even talking. So let's look at some of the aspects that came through. And when I say came through, where did they come through? We reached out to our own team. So some of you may or may not know that we run another company, which is our main company. And we reached out to the team and said, hey guys, this is the topic of discussion for today. And we're looking for some inputs. So tell us what you think. And would you believe the amount of inputs that came through was amazing, and the quality of inputs that came through. And I thought, wow, that's exactly what this is. This is really that's the first rule of communication. Are you listening? But more on that a little bit later. So some of the aspects that are important for the team that came through, and that's what we thought we will build the conversation on today. And one of the topmost things that came through is transparency. and honesty or truth, speaking the truth. It is what it is. Say it as it is. And Evan, again, you were reading something about this, and I'd love to hear you share your thoughts on that.
No, look, absolutely, and it's quite interesting, and we're now specifically talking in the work context, and it can apply anywhere, but basically the work context. And when you are communicating, it's interesting. You may not expect 100% transparency, but you do expect honest communication. And what does that even mean? Okay, so just sort of three examples. One is just first up, tell the truth.
Yeah.
Secondly, if you don't know, say that you will find out. And the
nice.
third one is if you can't say, and this is where that transparency thing comes in. So maybe there's access to information, whatever it is. Maybe I can't tell you, in which case say so.
Yeah.
So within that, you do get that value of transparency and obviously the truth.
Yes. Yes, that is true. And do you know, before... Sorry, go on.
You were saying before?
Somehow I just got a very large echo going on. So I wasn't sure if our listeners have some echo going on. But we will continue. So before I read some of those inputs that we got, I also want to talk about when you are sharing with transparency and you're sharing, there is something that it'll be useful for us to actually bear in mind, that whenever anybody is sharing anything, whenever anyone's saying something, everybody has their own models of the world. You know, we commonly say, put yourself in somebody's shoes. What does that really mean? Look at the world from their perspective. How many times have you heard that saying? Or how many times have you said it? What does that mean to you? We'd love to hear you say what you think. What does putting yourself in someone else's shoes even mean to you? Or when was the first time you heard that? And what did you do exactly? So everybody has their own model of the world, their own perspective on things, because whether we like it or not, we all bring our baggage to every single moment. We may have heard a certain word in a very different context, and we may have taken that in a certain way, which may or may not lend itself to a fruitful communication. So if you say something, I may hear it in a very different way. Know that even if I hear it, like Evan was saying earlier, even if I hear it in a certain way, it doesn't mean it is wrong or right. It is just my way of looking at things.
Look, I mean, funnily enough, that happens, if anybody who doesn't know, we're actually a married couple. So that happens at home a lot, where sometimes we'll hear the wrong word completely, and the whole meaning changes. And of course, you respond in a certain way. Oh my God, you know, so things can get bent out of shape really, very quickly if you're not careful.
Totally.
But it really is about my upbringing was different to Washington. So sometimes I'll say something in a context that's absolutely right for me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense or doesn't gel, and it causes that sort of conflict, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we've learned over the years that, hang on, just take a breath, let's go back and just work out what that is. So it's very funny.
It's true, and I want to read out a couple of things that came from the team. One of the first ones who mentioned transparency says this: trust and transparency is one of the most significant contributors to any organization's business and employees. It is important for any company and every company to be transparent and authentic to build that all-important trusting relationship. How true is that? And as Rajiv says, be transparent is having the courage, totally. Rajiv, you said our favorite word,
Courage.
And we will be talking about that in just a minute as we continue this conversation. Someone else said transparency and clarity is very important for effective communication. Now, effective communication. Evan, I want to hear from you what effective communication means to you.
That's a really good topic in the sense that when I'm communicating and I'm imparting something to somebody else, let's, from the premise of, getting the message across, it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm understood. Because the feedback you're getting will give you clues as to whether you're making your point or not.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be really hard.
Yeah.
But effective is when you essentially impart your message and somebody else can repeat it back to you and they've understood it and they are saying the same thing, maybe a little bit from their perspective, so to speak, maybe different languaging, but they actually give you the same message and you understand it the same way. So that's effective.
Okay, very nice. And someone else says clarity. Now the word clarity has come in. Clarity and transparency goes hand in hand. What follows is even better. Be clear and to the point. How many times? And I totally raise my hand and say, I waffle on for a bit because I digress, because I think as I talk. So for me, hearing the words creates that progression of that conversation. So I tend to digress a lot. So anybody who's listening...
Not at all challenging at home.
Anybody who's listening and you hear me waffle on, say, stay to the point, please. Consistency comes in now. Consistency and quick responses. Oh, quick responses, I like that. And elephant in the room, Evan, you often talk about this. Address the elephant in the room. Because the more... anyway, you were saying something. Evan, go on.
No, completely elephant in the room. What's interesting about that one, I know when I was in the corporate world, sometimes things were left to fester.
Yeah.
Depending on just a whole range of things. And that communication in a big corporate can actually be very toxic if you're not careful.
Yeah.
What I love, having joined Washer in the businesses that we're running, is there is no stone left unturned. If something is happening, Rossi, you're brilliant at this. You will actually call a meeting immediately. That elephant is called into question and is reduced down to size. Everybody has their input into whatever that particular issue is, and it's addressed, period. Yeah. And that really is important for me, an important part of the transparency and the truth, because you want one version of the truth finished.
Totally. And while on that, the word that also came through in the inputs was consistency. Consistent communication. So it's not about a lot of communication, it's about consistently communicating. We internally have our own weekly, daily, monthly touch points. So everyone knows at what time is that communication happening. If something important's happening, that's when you will hear about it. And consistency in communication, especially during times of change. It could be any change. It could be whatever. It could be something happening in the company, something in your life, something that's going to affect someone else. Consistency is key at that space. So, on that note, let's get on to the next C word over there, which is context. Now, interestingly, this didn't come through in any of the inputs. And for me, context is key. Context plays a big part in communicating. And now, I'm now talking about communicating when you are specially giving out an instruction or, I don't know, give me another example. In the meantime, I'll keep talking. And hey, guys, tell me what context means to you as well. Type in the comment box, because I'm going to talk a little bit about context, especially when we are rushing to type out an email and say something to our team to say, hey, pick this up and do this, for example. Yeah? Now, when we type out an instruction, how much context do we usually give? Or, let me put it this way, how much context do we think we are giving? And how much context is actually in that email? Evan, we are going on live, LinkedIn Live, and we're going to talk about communication. Please show up and give me your 3 points. That's great, because in my head, I know exactly what I would like to hear, or what is that conversation about. Have I actually given the full context? Sometimes we don't. One of the things that I like to talk about, and especially when we are in one-to-one mentoring or coaching space, to say, type out an email, and then here's a little experiment. Close your eyes. Please don't close your eyes if you're listening in while you're driving. But close your eyes. Put yourself in a different scenario, maybe 2-3 days later. Maybe you've returned after the weekend. Put yourself in a different scenario. Remove everything that you know about what you're talking in that email. Open your eyes and read it again. And then see how much does it really make sense. It all makes sense because half the context is in our own heads. The other person, poor thing, has no idea what you're talking about. Now, there's another test to this. You've written what you've written. And then, if you close your eyes, open it back, and say, if I read this email 6 months later, will this email still make sense? If I were to forward this email to somebody and say, repeat this, will that actually make sense? Many times, it doesn't. So I wanted to bring in context, whether it's in an email, whether it's in a face-to-face conversation, or you're sending a quick phone message to somebody, giving context. And I know some of the team who has joined in were probably nodding along with me because, oh my God, they hear about this from me a lot. So I know there is someone talking about it. Yeah, there you go. So yes, it is that giving context to that conversation actually helps in that information that somebody else is absorbing, to absorb it in a being in your side of the story, if you will.
Absolutely.
Is this making sense? Type a yes over there to tell me if this is making sense, because I talk a lot about context. So I'm now, not sticking to the point, probably waffling along.
No, you are sticking to the point.
Evan,
Here's the thing.
There is something that you were saying about vulnerability, which is our next point to talk about. Vulnerability, and as Rajiv said earlier, the courage to actually do so. Courage to be vulnerable. Why vulnerability? Why is vulnerability important over here? Whether we are sticking to the context of a workspace conversation, I see a lot of yeses coming through, totally, isn't it? And most of them, some of them from the team as well. They're probably nodding along again. So why is vulnerability important in a conversation, especially a workspace conversation, especially if you are sitting in the role of a leader? Gone are the days, I think, where you always had to have that armor on you to say, I got all the answers. I cannot show the chink in the armor. I cannot show any weakness in me. I got to be charging ahead. I got to have all the answers. We don't live in those days, do we? What do you think, Evan?
Look, totally not anymore.
Evan, can't hear you. Somewhere we seem to have lost your audio.
Just give me a second.
While you get your audio back, I will continue.
Please do.
So when we talk about vulnerability, say something, Evan. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm back.
There you are. Okay, continue.
I never left. So in terms of that, look, I think it's all about authenticity. So in that vulnerability, it helps to add the human side to the conversation.
Yeah.
Because we're not all robots, and we all get tired. We all have our moments. and sometimes no 2 days are the
That's true.
same. So, a whole bunch of things can be happening, stresses, whatever. So it is about being vulnerable, but also taking responsibility for your space. So that's where you're being authentic. Absolutely. One of the interesting feedbacks we actually had from the team was authenticity, clarity, and transparency in communication build emotional connections, which is absolutely true. When you then lean towards empathetic and vulnerable I can't even get my mouth around it, empathetic and vulnerable communication, it allows everybody to be heard, and it puts back the human
Nice.
element into the communication. And that is
Nice.
just so powerful. Absolutely so powerful.
Nice. This came from somebody in the team, didn't it?
Yeah, it
Very
did.
nice.
Because that leads to a strong bond of trust and understanding between the parties. Again,
Yeah.
two humans communicating.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
absolutely important. Yeah.
That's true. And for me particularly, it's important that we put ourselves as humans first. Whatever role we are playing in the company, whether you're a founder or whether you're part of the team, and whether you're a founder or not, you are always part of a team. So being human comes first for me. And it's perfectly okay for me to actually, and I know I've done this several times, to say, I'm stuck. I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea where this is leading. Somebody give me that outside perspective. Or sometimes to say, we're facing a mountain and I don't know how I'm going to climb it. Be with me. That's it. Sometimes that's all it takes.
And there's another limit to the authenticity and the vulnerability, and that is bear in mind that everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
Having the courage to speak up, even if you're disagreeing, whatever it is, if you have something to say it, because the forum is there. It's no good, 5 minutes after a meeting or something like that, going, oh, I should have said X, Y, Z. You know what?
Yeah.
If you thought about it at the time, have the courage to say something and put it out there. So that also is a vulnerability space, because not everybody wants to make waves. Not everybody wants to, interject, particularly if there's, a very senior member of a team in there kind of thing. It's like, if you have something to say and it's valuable, say it.
It is. And I love some of the comments that are coming through. Okay not to be okay. It's very important. And Ellie talks about courage and vulnerability, how they're both viewed. And yet, it takes courage to actually, I'm going to read out what Ellie says. However, how courageous would you be if you're bulletproof and walked into the line of fire? Not much. You're courageous if you're vulnerable to bullets, yet you walk out on a battlefield. I love that. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And again, more comments coming in. Being vulnerable shows you are real. You are human, totally. And in the workspace, something else that also happens. If you, in a leader space, are okay to show your vulnerability, guess what you're doing? You're encouraging everybody in the company to actually show up as humans. Because how many times, especially now, again, I keep going back to the corporate scenario, how many times does everybody put up that armor and say, no, I cannot show my vulnerability. I cannot show my weakness. You set the tone from the top. You show you're human, and guess what happens? Suddenly, you are surrounded by humans, because only then we're a part of a team. And I know there are even more comments coming in. This is amazing. I love this. I think vulnerability, we seem to have struck a chord over here, Evan. Mike has joined in as well, and Mike says, educate yourself to listen to others even if their opinions does not match yours. Spot on. And that is actually one of the points that we're going to be talking about. So stay with us till the end, because that is key to communication. Absolute key. So Evan, thank you for reading out what came through in that vulnerability space. And the second thing also that came out, which we hadn't actually put out there, was feedback. Now let's talk about feedback a little bit. What do we mean by feedback? Let's go back to what Evan started this entire conversation, is when two people are communicating, if we just look at a linear model of communication, one person says something, the other person receives. Yeah? If we just look at that and the other person doesn't actually say anything, the receiver doesn't actually say anything, yet expresses a lot, what is that? That is a form of feedback. So if we just start with that, how often do we make space for feedback? How often do we actually listen to feedback? How often do we encourage feedback? Now, what is the one key thing that is important for you in feedback? Type it and let us know, because feedback is very important for us, even within the company. There is something that a lot of people around us know, that whether it's a team, whether it is meetings, whether it is in a client space, something that we always do as soon as the meeting is over is people internally, where we were part of the meeting, and if it's just Evan and me, and we will do that straight after the LinkedIn Live as well, to ask two questions.
Every time.
What went well? What could go better? And absolutely every voice and every feedback is heard, because the minute we frame it as what could go better, you just see how many things that could go better come through, rather than saying, oh, where did we fail? While that's a great conversation
can I add a
piece,
context there?
how much input will you really get when you ask that question? So tell us what feedback even means to you, because for us, it is just two questions. What went well? What could go better? And we'll continue this conversation, because, Evan, I know you have marked out two specific inputs that came through.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. But can I add a context first? Because we were looking at feedback, and it's about making about the situation, not about the person.
Nice.
All right. So that's actually very critical. And so we were talking about context before. Everything we said made sense, and then there's an additional element that we hadn't actually said. So it's important to, again, have that in the right frame.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So there's some feedback. I thought I was having microphone issues, so just bear with me a second.
While you're pulling that up, I will talk a little bit about that, making things about the situation. How many times do we go into a feedback session and there are some emotions riding high, because everything kind of becomes about the person? So what you said is totally true. The feedback is about the situation. It could be anything that you're talking about, whether it is a project that you've just finished, whether you're just in an event that you've just finished, whether it is a client meeting that you've finished, whatever it is. The feedback is about the situation. Because when you address the situation independently is when you will actually take away things that can be done better, which in turn feeds back into how you do things together as a team within the company. So making something about the situation. And, Evan was talking about earlier, these leads to some interesting conversations at home. This flows into your personal life as well, life anywhere, whether you're having a conversation with your spouse, a partner, a child, whoever. When you make something about a situation, it takes the pressure off that conversation, which leads to open, honest, vulnerable inputs. So, Evan, over to you.
Well, I just want to add to what you just said, and it's very easy, particularly at home, and again, the context, when I grew up, it was a fairly judgmental kind of a place, right, wrong, judgment kind of thing. So it's very easy to take the feedback personally. And you're forever telling me, oh, don't take it personally. I'm kind of not, and yet I can see how it's causing a bit of a mess, right?
Yeah.
So it takes a little bit of training and look, it's one of the things we do in the mentoring space.
Yeah.
check the ego at the door, and it's about your business.
That's the one.
So that feedback is about the situation, and it takes a little bit of training to get there.
Yeah.
That's obviously very, very important.
Yeah.
The feedback. So from the team, we had two really interesting inputs. One was, it's very important to embrace transparency and build trust for any relationship. Also, both parties must be open to feedback, as self-awareness makes you more effective and efficient.
Ooh, nice.
So I thought that
Very
absolute
nice.
gem, that one.
Very
And I'm
nice.
skipping to the second part of the other wonderful feedback that we got, and
Yeah.
it's about consistent messaging and being courteous. So to complete the
Nice.
circle, of the communication is to sincerely ask for feedback
Yeah.
and then respond respectfully.
Ooh,
So
respond
again, that's the
respectfully.
key
I
thing,
love
is responding
that.
respectfully, making it about the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I know growing up, it was like, if you've got nothing nice to say, say nothing at all. It's not about that. It's not about the person, it's about the situation and what could go better.
Yeah.
So when communication is open like this, I believe it builds a positive environment for growth. And of course, and always listen more than you speak. We'll get to that one.
Listening, it's that reoccurring theme that's come through. Amanda says something over here, and I want to read this out. Making something about the situation and not about the person. Also keep emotion out of the situation. Stick to the facts in all situation. Removing emotion is so powerful in the workspace and personal space. And Amanda, I know you're listening in, so tell us a little bit more about what you mean by removing emotion being so powerful. Because and the reason I'm asking for this is, the minute we say something like this, people who don't have the full context might think, well, how can I remove emotions? What kind of life are we leading if we remove emotion from this? The way I look at it, what comes through to me, is removing emotions which will negatively impact that conversation. It's not removing emotion and becoming less of a human or becoming a robot. It really means removing emotion from removing that emotion that is attached to that situation and looking at it objectively. Evan, what do you think?
Oh, look, I completely agree. And I mean, it's very interesting. Like we said much earlier, a lot of our communication is in fact nonverbal. So there's tonality, and then there's the physiological sort of space.
Yeah.
I know through the years, just even between you and me, one of the things I do is I will express what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling on my face. And you're very, very adept at picking up those subtle clues. Those clues may or may not mean anything. And again, it's contextual. But if we start adding meaning, and that's kind of where we're going with this, if we start adding meaning that wasn't there in the first place, the whole context, the whole message changes.
Yeah.
So putting emotion aside, look, sometimes it can be difficult. And that's where, I mean, look, there's a very good tip that you told me one time. When you react to something, you're not actually reacting to that. There's something deeper. So that's why it's recommended, take a breath, just, count to 5, that sort of thing. And it's very interesting having that as a model. Very difficult to do when you're on the fly, when you're in the middle of a conversation. But that's what it means, putting the emotion aside. It's listening to the words without adding anything to that meaning. Yeah.
That's true. And you touched upon something that, I do talk about it, because sometimes what we say, or the emotion that comes up, in most cases, I know I'm digressing just a little bit, bear with me for a second. It really is when we display that emotion. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's frustration, but just the different shades of grey of anger. But that anger is only a symptom. It's something else that is actually leading to that anger. So just recognizing that goes a great way. It takes you a great way into being able to separate the emotion from the situation. I know we're digressing, but it's important, and I see there's a great amount of notes coming in from Amanda as well. it's impossible to remove emotions entirely, totally. We are humans, but removing the negative emotion that'll hinder our conversation or judgment of that particular situation, totally true. Yeah, some really great topics coming through. I love it. And now we come to listening. Why is listening so important? Because that is actually half the communication, isn't it? If you're not listening, then you're really not present. You're really not communicating. You're really not part of that conversation. So some of the things that we wrote down were, what does listening, and also this is also going to be a little bit of that striking a chord conversation. So keep those your inputs and your perspectives coming in that listening sphere. So if we strip everything down, what does that mean? When you're part of a conversation, are you listening? Are you present? Physically, or even if it's a virtual conversation like this, are you actually present mentally and emotionally? Are you keeping yourself receptive to absorbing what is being said or what is being communicated?
And distraction is a big one in there as well.
Oh,
So if you're talking to
yeah.
somebody and they're actually looking at their phone, you know they're not paying attention, so you're not present.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So it really is about the amount of attention that you're paying to the speaker, and it's also about like emotional awareness. So as the speaker, being tuned in to how the other person is responding, how they are, that sort of thing. Because sometimes, if they're not present or something is happening in their space, they're not getting your message. Right, so you're butting heads with what else is going on in their sort of space.
Yeah.
But I loved, again, we were talking about this, I think it was last week sometime, and there were 3 really interesting sort of little tests, if you will. How much eye contact was there during the communication?
Ooh, nice.
Right, that'll give you a good idea whether you're listening or not. How much eye contact was there? How was the speaker interrupted? Or was the speaker interrupted? Now, I know I'm guilty of this, where I think somebody has finished and then I start talking.
Me too.
I'm getting better at, listening to understand rather than listening to respond. But when there's a lively conversation, it's so easy to get so, involved and invested in it. So, you've got something to say, something to add. So was the speaker interrupted? And were there any follow-up questions? Again, to seek understanding. Now, we have this in the masterminds, right? You ask a question and then there's a follow-up just to dig that little bit deeper to make sure that we understand with clarity. So eye contact, interruption, and follow-up questions are a very, very good indicator as to whether you are listening or not.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, really, really good. And how many times do we even audit ourselves? How are we when we are listening? I am totally guilty of that as well. I interrupt all over the place. And I realize I'm doing this, and it just, I will be aware even more. It's true, because I sometimes I think my thoughts run away faster than I can actually bring them out. So I'm constantly keeping up with saying what I have to say. Anyway, see again. So totally true. And how many times do we really audit? I think that is one of my biggest takeaways from just today's conversation, to say, how much do I interrupt? A lot.
I mean, Mike makes a good point. Starting a conversation with good judgment requires that you turn knowledge into understanding. So it is about paying attention, eye contact, and those follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Love it. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, really good. Christine says, not just hearing, but actually listening to what is being said. Oh, yeah.
Or to use a bit of street language, you feel me?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love that one, because it's... Anyway, that's a different topic. We will pick that up. I think we will pick that up in our next one. Oh, I don't know what happened there. If you can hear... music somewhere, please ignore because something seems to have started in the background.
Hey, if it's brand music, we're okay with it.
It is not. Anyway, so about listening. See, that's what happened. The distraction came through. But hey, technology, that is what happens when you have about 500 different tabs open. And I'm going to go back to some of the comments. I feel in today's video call world, oh, this is an issue, switching screens. So true. So true. How many times do we have Outlook open and email pops up and WhatsApp message pops up? How many times do we switch screens? So when we're having a conversation like this, are we actually listening? How many times are we paying attention to what is actually being said? I love that one.
Here's a little tip.
Yeah, go on.
So with the Zoom culture that we sort of now have,
Yeah.
how many times do you see somebody actually looking at the camera when they're speaking? That's the only way you can do eye contact in Zoom. Actually talk to the camera. We learned that actually from Reem.
That's true. And I suppose it's a matter of comfort, isn't it? Because we're humans. We want to look at someone's face when we are talking. So naturally, we do that. We're looking at people's faces. Because that's what we do naturally. And it takes a little bit of training to look up and look at the camera because someone else is looking at you. Because if you're the one talking, look straight at the camera. Oh, that's a tech tip almost in listening.
It is a tech tip. But what I have found is by doing that, again, it removes the distractions. Because again, we've all been on lots of Zoom calls, 40, 50 people, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if you look around the room, people are doing this. They really are not listening in the slightest.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the feedbacks we got, by the way, from our team, and I'm just skipping halfway through. So building a team with 100% trust is vital. It's a vital part of daily operations in any organization.
Nice.
And it's vital that everybody understands that they will be heard. Listening is a true skill. Only when we really listen will we actually participate in the conversation.
Very nice.
I completely love it.
Very nice. Oh, absolutely brilliant. There's somebody else who says...
Actually, there's another one here.
Yeah, go on.
So in addition to transparency, consistency, and clarity, obviously listening is an important part of communication and that process. Yeah. Knowing that my views and ideas are heard makes a difference and gives me the confidence to open up during the meeting or the conversation and bring out the best that I can offer the company.
Oh,
a feeling of being shut out erodes trust and confidence and can impact key performance areas.
Oof.
Again, it's about perspective, right?
This is brilliant.
That's why we asked the team, because I couldn't have put it quite like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
On that note, I have to say thank you so much, team, for really just being open and opening this conversation so beautifully. Everybody's inputs have been phenomenal, really, really good. And like Evan said, we couldn't have said it better. This is brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So what are some of the things that we talked about today, Evan? Communication, just starting with what is communication? When do we actually start this communication process, if you want to call it? We talked about different aspects of it. What are some of the different aspects that are important to whoever you're talking to? Transparency. We talked about transparency, honesty, having the courage to be vulnerable, giving full context, feedback, listening. So many things that came through. Just very quickly, as we begin to round up, do put in what is your top takeaway from today's conversation, or what is one of your best practice that you would like to share, that you already do in your companies, that you would like to share with all our listeners. Do type in. We'd love to hear from everybody who has joined in. What is your best practice or your best takeaway from today? You have joined the Power Hour with Dare to Scale, from our desk to yours. And do you know something that came through to me, Evan? A topic for next time's Power Hour, keeping with the communication, in the communication space, but something that is very rarely directly addressed is the art of discussion. The art of discussion has somehow, we have perfected as humans that art of discussion into the art of argument, because we straight away launch into what actually comes up as an argument or differences of opinion, rather than putting all the opinions on the table, different perspectives on the table, and turning it into a discussion. How about that? Do you think we should talk about that?
I totally love that. You know what? It reminds me of. Do you remember the opening couple of minutes of the newsroom?
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Jeff Daniels is there giving his speech, and it's one of the best openings I've seen for a long time. But he was talking about being informed.
Yeah.
And being informed means having a discussion, which means that there are alternate viewpoints out there.
That's
so it's not always being right and wrong, but it's being open to another idea, another opinion. So I think that's really important. Oh, look, there's a good one. Communication. You have two of these, which are ears, one of these, so use it in that proportion.
That is true. That is true. I would love that. Oh, hey, and also, as we've already now talked about what the topic of discussion is for next time, send in your thoughts, send in your viewpoints, send in some tips that you, or your own perspectives that you would like to include in the conversation. Send them on yourmentor@daretoscale.com. You have all been amazing, because since the last time, the number of emails that came through giving all these brilliant outputs has been amazing, which means the Power Hour is on the right track. And continue joining in. So keep telling us what is your best takeaway from today. What is your best practice? We'd love to read this out. And we will continue seeing you back here. So Mike says, give your team the power and support to lead. And trust me that they will excel and come up with amazing solutions, ideas that will take your business to a different level. Mike.
Completely. Rocket.
Absolutely rocking this entire space with that one comment. Totally true. Totally true. Respect your team for what they can bring and give them the space to say what they can see. Because, Mike, I love what you're saying over here, because every person in your team, whatever role they play, can see a different aspect of the business, a different perspective of the business, something that one person may or may not ever see, actually may never see. So opening that space up and giving the team, handing the mic over to the team and saying, go on, your turn, you have a voice, it will be heard, speak up. And yes, some of the gems that come out of that, a conversation like that, is unparalleled. So brilliant one. Mike, thank you so much for sharing that one. Evan, what do you think about that?
Giving the power to the team. I mean, look, there's many mentoring stories and coaching stories that are used in getting that message across. And oftentimes it can be as simple as talking to the janitor on the factory floor about something. And I know you've got a great story about that, but anyway, but it's asking the right questions, but also listening. And when there's an open, like you open up that playing field, if you will, and welcome the feedback, welcome the suggestions.
Yeah.
Really, it sometimes is ridiculous how clever the solutions are, that a team member who's actually literally on the factory floor can see something and say, well, if you did this instead, that'd solve the problem. And all of a sudden, oh my God, we're so innovative. Really, we just listened to one person, made a change, and it's really, there's a flow-on effect, and it's changed everything else. Amazing.
Always. And also recognize the fact that when you hire someone in your team, you're hiring them for what they do really well. So maybe it's time to back off and say, there's a reason why you're occupying that role. Talk to us. Not many of us do that. So brilliant, very, very nicely done. And I can see, Mike, you are already receiving a lot of agreement through those comments. That's brilliant. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Indeed.
This is
It's
the
been
Power
wonderful.
Hour. It is. This is the Power Hour with Dare to Scale, from our desk to yours. Keep those comments coming, keep those inputs coming on yourmentor@daretoscale.com, and we will continue the conversation 2 weeks later. And I know in many parts of the world we are going away for a longer Eid break. Happy Eid in advance, everybody.
Happy Eid
Enjoy
indeed.
your time away, and we will see you on, I think it's the 28th, isn't it? 2 weeks. Yes, Wednesday 28th at 11 a.m. UAE time. We will see you back here to talk about the lost art of discussion, or is it really lost? We will talk about that. And stay safe, yes. Thank you so much for
Definitely stay
joining
safe.
in. Absolutely. Keep your distance, wear your mask, everything. Keep safe, and we'll join again. Thank you very much, guys.
Indeed.
Bye for now.